It's day three at the Democratic Convention, and we continue our coverage here on CNN News 18. I'm joined by Flavio Hickel Jr. He is Assistant Professor of Political Science at Washington College. Thanks very much, Flavio, for making time for us.
Thanks for having me.
Flavio, a big night for Tim Walz, Kamala Harris's pick as vice presidential nominee. Most Americans were mostly unfamiliar with Walz before this pick. What are you expecting from Walz later tonight, Wednesday night, our time, when he speaks?
Yeah, well, I think generally speaking, or at least historically, the vice presidential candidate has two main tasks. Number one, to sort of quell any concerns that the American public might have about their qualifications, should they eventually succeed to the presidency down the road, particularly for a candidate like Walz, who didn't have to go through a lengthy primary process and that sort of thing. This is an important task, right? So learning more about him, learning more about his government experience, that sort of thing. And secondly, to serve as, for lack of a better term, sort of an attack dog against the opposition, right? Historically, the vice president is the one that's going to launch the strongest, most negative attacks against the opposition. This way, the presidential candidate doesn't have to, because sometimes the American public is going to react more negatively when they hear these sort of negative attack ads. So it's better that the presidential candidate doesn't really dirty their hands and leave that to the vice president. So that's sort of what I expect to see coming out of him tonight.
Flavio, Walz is extremely charismatic. We've heard him speak. He's known to make these riveting speeches. He doesn't need a teleprompter. He really, really charges up a room. Any concerns of Walz overshadowing Kamala in the lead up to November?
It's a good question. I'm not personally overly concerned with that. I think he's really charismatic. I think the American public has really taken to him very quickly. He certainly lends himself well to sort of social media, meme culture, and all the ways that you're sort of alluding to. But I think he actually complements Harris really well, right? Walz comes off as a very average, relatable person. And I think the rollout of Kamala Harris's campaign thus far has largely communicated a similar thing, right? So I think they're actually feeding into each other pretty well. She's receiving, I think she's doing better than most would have expected in terms of her campaign rollout. So I don't know that he could overshadow her in that way. Remains to be seen, but I'm skeptical of that.
Got it. So, Flavio, this next question, your area of expertise, so you're going to like this one. You closely study the Latino vote. A recent poll shows that the Democrats have closed a large enthusiasm gap amongst Latino voters. Another matter if that actually translates into votes. But can this Harris-Walz ticket win them over?
I think the answer is yes, with a lot of nuance and provisos, as you might expect, right? So historically, Latinos in America have supported the Democratic Party over the last several decades at about 70%, right? Somewhere between, 65 to 70, more or less, right, depending on the candidate, which is to say that Republicans have secured roughly 30% of the Latino vote going back several decades, right? So the big thing that's had academics scratching our heads over the last, 8 years is how did Donald Trump do as well as previous Republican candidates or better in light of the fact that the cornerstone of his campaign has been this anti-immigrant rhetoric, which many Latinos regard as implicitly anti-Latino rhetoric, right? So how has he been able to sort of do this? I think there's a variety of factors for it. I think part of it is what we write a lot about, me and my colleagues, the research that I've been doing is on the growth of what we call Latino immigrant resentment. This tendency for a growing minority of the Latino community, by our estimates, conservatively roughly 30%, that actively adopt anti-immigrant stereotypes, that Latino immigrants are an economic drain on society, that there's an element of criminality to it, that they refuse to assimilate to American culture, and they blame Latino immigrants for the discriminatory environment they face in the United States. So for this growing minority of Latinos, they see voting for Donald Trump and supporting anti-immigrant policies as a means of signaling that distinction to broader American society. In other words, stop discriminating against us. We're not the problem. It's these other Latino immigrants. And so I think that's a big part of why Trump has been doing better marginally among the Latino community, increasing his vote share from like 30 to 35, depending on the poll, perhaps even as high as 40%. I think some segment of those voters, Harris and Walz are going to struggle with, right? I think you're always going to have about 30% of Latinos that are going to go Republican, despite Trump's anti-immigrant messaging. You're going to have a small portion on top of that that may be going for it, because of that anti-immigrant messaging. But what I think Harris and Walz do is they lay to rest some concerns that many Latinos did have about Joe Biden, and particularly Joe Biden and the economy. So I think some of the growth you've seen in Latino support for Trump over the last couple of months is a reflection of unease about the economy and unease that Joe Biden can right the ship. And so they said, I will vote for Trump despite the anti-immigrant rhetoric.